In Buddhism, there's a tenet called the three treasures. The three treasures are Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Simply, these mean the teacher, the teaching, and the group of practitioners or students. So the Buddha refers to the original Buddha, the historical Buddha, or all awakened beings who have realized Buddha nature, or fully awake nature, the Zen masters of the past, Zen masters of the present, other enlightened teachers, non-Buddhist teachers who have realized no self, anatta, liberation. So in whatever form that comes in your life, the jewel called Buddha is the archetype or representation of a teacher. That person or even force you come in contact with that opens you, that points you to your true nature. They give practical advice. They give direct pointing or transmission. And they give an example of how this is possible. And that may be the most important aspect of what they do. Dharma represents the teaching, the transmission, the possibility, the process of realization itself in all of its forms. Often it starts of its own accord. It just starts moving in your life. Sometimes you come in contact with a book or a teaching or a sutra, and it sparks something in you, starts to awaken something. Dharma refers both to the teaching, the pointer, that which you came in contact with, and what is moving inside you simultaneously. Like a chicken pecking at the egg to allow its chick to come through the other side, and the chick moving and pushing, trying to break through the egg. This is Dharma, functioning. In the deeper sense, everything is the functioning of the Dharma, but we'll get into that towards the end of the video. Sangha is the group. It is, in the historical sense, the monastic group of people who sat, meditated, lived together in monasteries. But in the modern sense, it's groups of people who come together to sit, meditate, or online to discuss what they've gone through, which teachings and pointings work for them. It's also, and maybe most importantly, a friend that you come in contact with that somehow supports your movement toward your deeper truth. This may be a compassionate friend. It may be a friend who is going through this process themselves. This also includes your family who supports you as you move through this process, as you awaken, even if they don't know it. So before we discuss the deeper meaning of these three jewels, I want to point out a few pitfalls that we can come into contact with when engaging these three aspects of realization or resources to help us wake up. The first broadly refers to all of them, and that is that we can wrongly perceive that all three of these jewels exist somewhere outside. That the Buddha, the enlightened teacher, is something that we aren't, that excludes us. And logically it makes sense that I, as this practitioner, this person who wants to wake up, is not the same as the Buddha who's pointing to that awakening. At the level of mind, of course, that's true. But in a deeper place, it turns out to be far less true. So it's important to understand that you already have everything you need to wake up. Don't let the teaching of the three treasures or three jewels convince you that there's something outside of yourself that you need to wake up. These are just pointers, helpful roadmaps, catalysts, but the reaction happens inside you, and it has to. So take that into consideration when you engage any of these resources. Specific to the Buddha jewel or the teacher jewel, there are some pitfalls in the book I wrote, which I'll put a link to underneath the video. I go into a lot of detail, more than I'm going to go into in this video, about pitfalls of interacting with teachers. But first and foremost, it's just important to recognize that you have to do the work. In a real sense, this is a very solitary movement, a very austere movement. There is help outside, there are good pointers, but you really have to do the work. So the most important orienting principle is not to give too much stake in your realization to a teacher, or any teaching. The second thing is, there are many teachers who talk about awakening and realization who haven't completely gone through the process themselves. And there are various degrees of this in various teachers, which is fine. They can teach if they want to, but just understand sometimes you'll be getting a transmission that's mixed. They're transmitting something real, something living, alive truth, alive dharma, and they're also transmitting something else, ego structures, misconceptions, etc. So I won't pick on anyone specifically, just know that every human being is potentially flawed, and when someone teaches from earlier stages of realization, they can teach in ways that will confuse you at times and may get you completely off track at other times. And in good conscience, I have to say that there are charlatans in this industry, because it really has become an industry. They're not that hard to pick out if you're honest with yourself. Anyone who's manipulative, who's taking advantage of people, asking for ridiculous amounts of money, any kind of culty behavior, obviously this is all a bunch of red flags, so just avoid it. But there are some very popular teachers, actually, and have been, that really do more harm than good when it comes to this topic. There are people who are sociopaths, to be honest. So just be aware of that. Hopefully, if you know what sociopathic behavior looks like, it's not too hard to pick out, although sociopaths are really good at hiding. They're really good at seeing what works, seeing what works to manipulate people, to get people to believe what they say, and then doing it because it gets them what they want. So just be aware that someone can talk about awakening, love, truth, any interconnection, any of it, and not have your best interest in mind at all. They've just seen that talking like that works. It gathers people around them, etc. So, not to be too heavy on that topic, but just be aware that that does exist, of course. As far as dharma, the true dharma, which is here all the time, it's always being transmitted. It's moving inside you right now. It hears the message, it is the message. It's the sum total of all experiences. It's natural perfection. It can't be sullied or misunderstood, because it is also the misunderstanding. It is also the confusion, the disorientation. With all that said, just know that if you are doing a lot of reading, gathering a lot of information, you can sort of overlook the nature of the true Dharma. The true Dharma is alive. It's not fixed. It's not a fixed concept. It's not a fixed map. It's not a fixed path. It's always changing. It's reliable in that it's unknowable or indeterminate. But in that, when there's full surrender to that unknowability, there's paradoxically a knowing that is imperturbable. So it gets very paradoxical. But I think the major pitfall with Dharma, with our interpretation of what that jewel means, is when we over-intellectualize. And the last video I made, I go into some detail on this. The knowledge, the written knowledge, can be helpful, of course. And it becomes more helpful the more you wake up. But especially with the initial movement, intellectual and cognitive knowledge is far less important than instinct, surrender, full immersion into your koan, mu, the breath, the moment, presence, consciousness. Sangha. There are a lot of pitfalls potentially when you interact with groups of people, especially when it comes to awakening. Human group dynamics have a lot of potential for distortion and fixation. So it's important to always be aware of that. Be aware of your true motivation to be in a group of people when it comes to supporting your awakening process. Things can pop up in groups of spiritual seekers that are not particularly helpful, like competitiveness, inauthenticity, sometimes even passive aggressiveness, some kind of strange dynamics in people who are sort of halfway awake or moving through the awakening process, but not realized enough that the realization is stabilized in their life. So just be aware of that. There are, of course, groups that are extremely supportive and valuable, but you may have to taste different experiences, different groups to find those that really do support your process of awakening. And if you have a tendency to involve yourself in groups of people that are dysfunctional in various ways, be careful not to carry that into this endeavor of awakening, because it very quickly just becomes another distraction. So if you're interacting with a group of people that are supportive of the awakening process, not over-intellectualizing it, there's availability for group sitting, prolonged meditation, retreat settings. Those are very valuable, especially early on. So what are the deeper meanings of the three jewels? Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The beautiful thing is that the more the process of realization evolves, is carried out, matures, the more reverence you have for all of these jewels. And also, the more you see that the conventional aspects of these jewels, as described in the beginning of the video, are far less important than the subtle aspects. So what is the subtle aspect of the Buddha jewel or the teacher jewel? Well, at some point it becomes obvious that the teacher is every single moment teaching what realization is to itself. Every sound, the water cascading over the dishes, the hand moving to scrub the plate clean. That is the entire universe coming forward as just that motion, just that movement, just those bubbles. That is Buddha nature, operating perfectly. The teaching is there. The teaching is everywhere once you're ready to completely open to it. Once you've let go of your own agendas, ideas about what realization is, what you are, what you want and need. You could call this a full trust in life. Then the teachers are literally everywhere. They're not just the most enlightened person you can find online or the best possible writing you can find. They're also that person you walk past in the grocery store. They're the sensation of the foot as it touches the ground walking across the parking lot. That's your teacher. It's right there. It's right there every moment, staring you in the face, moving up through the sensations in your body. It's every movement, every sound, every doubt, every movement of mind. Even thoughts and delusions become your teachers. They show you everything you need to see. So there's such perfection in this surrender to moment life. Don't apply the mental activity of seeking to Buddha, to teacher, because that will always make it somewhere else. If I could only find the right teacher, teaching, etc. When you are waiting to find it, you miss what's teaching you right now. You miss that emotion that you've been habitually avoiding. Sadness, grief. You miss the full penetration of the cloud, the sky. You miss the unconditional love of the textures of life, the joys, sorrows, disappointments that are opening you again and again and again. So it's important to recognize that the teacher is life itself when we're not looking through perceptual filters that are conditioned beliefs and contexts and reactions. The deeper meaning of dharma is the realization process itself. What grace it is that we can recognize suffering as suffering and recognize that we've been living in a bit of a dream, mind states, conditioned experiences internally, and start to turn our attention first to the unbound nature of the consciousness itself, a sense of being, and then to the vivid, non-dual sense world. And disentangle identity from our conditioned experience. How does that happen? It seems to happen all its own, even though sometimes we feel like we're driving. It carries itself forward, and the more you wake up, the less of you that's there, and the more the realization and life are intertwined, are one and the same, the more obvious it gets that this is just great perfection, moment to moment, a magnificent display of unfiltered reality. What more could you ask for? What better teaching is there than that? So I think it's important to always have some reverence for this process, for the realization process. I do see some people who move through deeper stages of realization and get disillusioned at times. And if I had to put my finger on what it is I see that's common to those situations, is they don't recognize the grace of the process itself, the grace of realization coming forth in your life that plucked you out of suffering and showed you what unfiltered reality is. The more you give yourself to that, the more you let it overtake you and all movements of life, the more obvious it becomes that this is total exertion of the cosmos moving as this moment. It doesn't get any better than that. That's dharma, perfect functioning of the dharma. As Banki said, everything is perfectly managed in the unborn. Where's the unborn? Where is it not? And Sangha, the deeper meaning of Sangha, at least in this moment, as it's occurring to me. There are probably many deep meanings of Sangha, but to me it's the incredible paradox of interconnection and only one experience at the same time. There can only be this. There's nothing outside of this. There's no past, there's no future. And yet the textures are so clearly exhaustive of all possible experiences. That's interconnection. It's so intimate, obvious, wonderful. So, brotherhood, sisterhood, at all levels, the human level, the emotional level, the level of consciousness, the energetic level, and the level of emptiness, all in perfect concert, Each level is in concert with itself, with its own set of conditions and rules that govern. And all levels are perfectly coordinated with all other levels. So, Sangha is where this magnificent realization is carried forth into the conventional, the relative, the simple day-to-day business of being you, the human, with a human story and a human narrative and friends and coworkers, all expressing as apparently separate, interacting entities, experiences, and events, with no need to deny things at that level, the level of the conventional. Perfect enjoyment of that display, and yet never leaving the absolute, never overlooking the perfect functioning of realization, undivided nature, empty nature.